Rogenbuck. So we will have him give his report right now. Kevin is from Ramsey County. So, Mr. Rogenbuck, if you would take the mic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Kevin Roggenbuck with Ramsey County Public Works and Regional Railroad Authority. I appreciate you putting me on the agenda early. As many of us are, we are double booked. Just a real quick update for you. On March 19th, the Ramsey County Regional Railroad Authority Board approved an amended and restated lease agreement and operating agreement with Amtrak for use of Union Depot. As you know, Ramsey County Regional Railroad Authority owns Union Depot here in St. Paul. So we approved new lease and operating agreements with Amtrak and sent those agreements on to Amtrak. This would allow Amtrak to serve Union Depot with the TCMC second train, and it amends our current agreement we have with them in service with the Empire Builder coming into Union Depot. This wrapped up several months of negotiating with Amtrak. It was a lot of back and forth, some no in-person meetings, but a lot of Zoom and Teams meetings and a lot of sending draft documents back and forth. Some of the key things in the agreement between Ramsey County Regional Railroad Authority and Amtrak include essentially resolving an insurance issue Amtrak had with the potential for third-party insurance claims. The county's taking on all that liability, and we've also asked the state to help us. There's a bill in the legislature for some assistance in covering any liability, I believe over $50 million. It removed a provision that gave Amtrak approval of up to 16 special trains per year coming into Union Depot, and it removed a provision where Amtrak had, in the agreement it said Amtrak had exclusive use of Union Depot. This is especially important, I think, to your organization because that allows for other train operators to bring passenger trains into Union Depot without any kind of legal issue or objection from Amtrak. And then finally, we agreed on a cost to store the train at Union Depot. We had applied for federal funding to extend Track 3, where it was a more convenient location for the second train to overnight and be serviced. We weren't successful in that federal grant application, so the second train will have to run down to the tail track. It's a little far away from the depot facilities and things like that. So, but anyway, we've agreed on a cost to store the train overnight, and also involved some discussions with the states on that because part of that cost would be shared by the states. And then finally, the agreement has been sent to Amtrak for their review and approval. As I said, we've been negotiating with them all along, so it should be approved. I have not heard back from anyone in Amtrak or from staff here if Amtrak has approved the agreements, but that's a big step in getting the second train up and running and getting a service date chosen. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Kevin, thanks for the update, and it's good news that things are moving forward. You mentioned that you were unsuccessful at getting the federal grant for improvements. I presume those are things you'd still like to do. Do you plan to apply again in future grant cycles and in other federal programs?
Mm-hmm. Scott, I think we will. A decision hasn't been made yet. We did have a debrief with a Federal Railroad Administration staff person who's involved in the grant program that we applied in. It was the federal state, I'm not sure the full title, Federal State Partnership Program. And they made a comment and kind of showed us where they thought our application was lacking, and even suggested maybe a state of good repair grant would be a better way to go. So we'll consider a new grant application, perhaps in a different category in the near future.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? If not, well, thank you, Kevin, for your presentation, and on to your next one. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it.
We'll now go back to item 5, which is the FRA grant update. Who's leading that, Scott?
I guess I'll start out, and Ann may jump in with other comments, or even Jason, who's on the line. So this is kind of the heart of what the commission is working on right now. So to bring everybody up to speed, the commission was formed in 2021 with the goal to move forward with passenger rail service and other improvements in the corridor between Eau Claire, Menominee, Baldwin, Hudson, and the Twin Cities, and the 3 counties in west central Wisconsin that are part of the commission. And the Federal Railroad Administration, through the bipartisan infrastructure law in December of 22, launched the Corridor ID program, which the first stage is to apply for a grant to be designated as one of the corridors by FRA, the Federal Railroad Administration, who's administering this, which is the first step in a multi-step process to actually implement either additional or new passenger rail service. So the commission applied for a grant in March of 23, which was supported by Wisconsin and Minnesota DOTs, Ramsey and Washington counties, the Union Pacific Railroad, and a number of other parties. And we found out in December that the grant was awarded. And in fact, the good news was every grant that touched our area that was applied for was awarded. So since the grant was awarded, we put together, or I guess we had this group going to put the grant together, and now we have continued to work on it now that it's been awarded. So we have a working group from the commission, and that includes me, Ann Schell, who's also a commissioner and has a background as a transportation planner, Eric Anderson from the West Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission, who is the Metropolitan Planning Organization Director for Chippewa and Eau Claire, Jeff Abbott, who was introduced here today. Jeff is retired or semi-retired Wisconsin DOT professional. And then working with us have been Jason Szymanski, who is the finance director for Eau Claire County, and Greg Bovee, who is the purchasing director. And just sort of remind everybody how all of this has been working. We're here in person and having today's meeting in Menominee, thanks to Dunn County helping us keep this commission going. And then Eau Claire County had offered to be the administrative and fiscal agent for the commission. And so we actually used Eau Claire County's credentials to apply for the grant. And officially the grant was awarded to Eau Claire County on behalf of the commission. And so they're involved in it. They're helping us administer it. That's why Samantha is serving as doing the meeting work, et cetera, and Sharon, of course, is counsel. So a little bit of background. So we began meeting with FRA on what is required and what we'll be able to do with the grant. And they have provided paperwork, something called an attachment 2, which basically outlines what the grant offers, who's involved, who's responsible. And we've been working with FRA, having every other week meetings over the last couple months to get that document together. And last Wednesday, we had an update meeting with FRA in which the final version of the document was provided to them. And that included getting feedback from both their administrative people and their legal counsel to make sure it was all the I's are dotted and all the T's are crossed. And so the next step is it needs to go through the federal process to actually be signed off on by various departments within DOT. And our expectation right now with USDOT, and our expectation right now is FRA will give us something called a notice to proceed, which we think will come in the first half of May. Then what will happen, because we don't already have the staff to actually do the work to develop what's called the scoping, we will seek out consulting help to be able to put the scoping process together. This is step 1, and so I'll try to explain what step 1 is. Step 1 is called scoping, which is you look at all of the different aspects of implementation that you're going to do in something called the service development plan, which is, I guess, the heart of the planning of figuring out more about what you would propose to go forward with. FRA also was quite firm in saying that if you have overlapping corridors, you need to coordinate closely between grant recipients. And so that would be particularly true of Wisconsin DOT and the Chicago and Milwaukee to Twin Cities route, because that entirely overlaps this route. And so, and we know that Rich, who's on this call, has regularly attended our meetings and has been part of us working, and they also gave us feedback on our grant when we were putting it together. The scoping is to get ready for the next stage of planning. We would like it to be more robust than that, but understand that that's where we are on that. And I think we're looking at having that done by early next year. but we won't know until we've awarded a consulting contract and have a timeline exactly what that'll be. Our submission to DOT, US DOT or FRA did have a timeline that we had to provide them, although at their advice, it's got a very loose deadline later on, because just to allow that it doesn't have to be amended if it takes longer than planned.
I would add some of the work we're doing right now is that same group of people is working on a request for proposals to send out to get responses back, proposals back from consulting firms. So we're hoping to have that ready, so when we get the notice to proceed, we can send it out right away and really get moving.
I just want to confirm, so in step one is no match, and so this consulting is coming 100% from the grant monies that we received from the FRA. Yes.
Yeah, and the work that's included in that is the development. What the consultant will do is develop a statement of work for the service development plan, which is step 2.
Okay.
So that's not included in this one, but they'll develop the scope of work for that, a schedule, and budget.
And step 2 had a 10%?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And that's a relevant thing to bring up, because if you look all the way through the process, if I can state the process, and I don't have it in front of me, so it's the scoping, which is the one we've been awarded the grant to do. I think the implication is if you successfully do step 1, you are eligible for step 2, which is the 90% federal funding, but you do need to come up with 10%. Each step is progressively more expensive, so the 10% is against what is probably the least expensive, although that's part of what we'll learn in step 1 is how expensive will that be. Then the next step after the service development plan, which the service development plan is the heart of the plan. In other words, things like where a station's going to go, how often will the trains run, what are you going to do for equipment. We're putting in our RFP the information because we have some unique things about our grant. Or about our proposal. We have the competitive selection of an operator, as well as opposed to assuming Amtrak would be the operator. They could compete for it as well. A different method for securing track access in the host railroad, and the transit-oriented development, some other things. So we anticipate all of those would need to be worked on in the service development plan. Then you go into environmental clearances, which is a 20% match, and then you have design and construction. And so things like buying equipment or obtaining equipment, doing any capital improvements, building stations, all that, those are obviously more expensive items, and they require 20% match. It's always worth noting that under this program, those matches are much better for localities than before the bipartisan infrastructure law, because before that they were either 50 or 100%, or either 50% local or 100% local or state. But that will be an issue that we'll have to deal with as to where the 10% would come from once we're ready to do the service development plan.
The service development plan is in step 2.
That's step 2 that requires the 10%.
So in step 1, will we be working on how our collaboration is going to operate, how our various municipalities and whatnot are going to make these decisions about items that cross the boundaries? I would like to see that for our city, at least, since not all of the partners on the commission are going to have a financial or a station, and trying to figure out how we're going to navigate that with regards to requesting funds and our various councils and boards and whatnot.
I suppose as a part of the budget, we could possibly include that. I'm not certain.
Yeah, we probably want to talk to our consultant, see how much of that they can do for us. The governance of the service. So the more you think about it, the more there is to consider. So for instance, our commission was formed with the purpose of making this move forward. Whether we want to be an entity that literally sponsors the service, or are we an entity that literally gets the ball rolling and, Wisconsin DOT or some new authority governance as to where are you going to go with this is something that will have to be worked out later on too. Our members of the commission may want to be thinking about how much might we expect to come from our states for the service development plan. It's a budget year in Wisconsin next year, and whether we need to be prepared as entities to come up with some or all of the 10%. And I think that's the same question will have to come up on Wisconsin DOT's own corridors as well. They'll need money to do their 10%. And again, those are much smaller numbers in the context of overall transportation costs than it will be once we move to actually implementing the corridor, but it still has to be done regardless.
Right. Yeah, the more tangible, the more concrete I can bring to my city, the better, with regards to future needs, cost needs, and getting things onto our capital asset list.
And maybe to wrap up your other question about the 100%. So we needed to get this document completed that we're waiting for the notice to proceed, as they don't reimburse anything until you get that done. And so the initial work to get that put together, anything we were doing there was not reimbursable. Fortunately, we have some volunteers who have transportation expertise, and then Wisconsin DOT did allow us to use their consultant as well, and we appreciate that, because that consultant helped us put our document together too, so we did not have to pay for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Scott, as we move forward with the percentages, is that strictly financial, or can some of that be in-kind stuff, or can you flesh me out on that?
That is a really good question, and it should probably be pursued. I was at a presentation on Saturday where the city of Madison has already started a station site selection effort, which they are expending money on. They've hired a consultant. They have a person in their transportation department. Of course, they're a larger entity. And I know she mentioned during her presentation that they are hopeful that so I don't know if they've confirmed it, but that the money they're spending now can count towards their 10% when it comes to a service development plan, because it's part of what would be in one. And so that might be a way to look at it as well. The other thing that you should think about, and it's probably for future commission meetings, is we don't stop everything we're doing and just wait for this to get done. We did start a committee to start looking at station issues, and because we had to get this done and we are all volunteers, we didn't have time to continue that, but we could restart that effort. We could, there could be things like Madison is doing that. Maybe the communities that would have stations could do some work on that issue, and perhaps we could find out if that would count towards the match. So it's also a new federal program, and I think they're making interpretations as they go along in some of these things as well. The only thing we do generally know is you can't match federal money with other federal money unless it's specifically allowed.
We will move on to the other updates. Greg Mathis from MnDOT is online, so if he would like to take over and bring us up to date on what's happening with his area.
Great. Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. Great to be with you today. Great discussion on what you've been working on. So since you've been talking about Corridor ID, I'll start with our Corridor ID project, which is Northern Lights Express, which is the proposed passenger service between Minneapolis and Duluth. I think really a lot of the details have been covered on how all this works. So we've been meeting with FRA since January on this. We got our grant obligated on March 26th, so we're a little bit ahead of where you are with your process. And that obligation is important because that is two things. One is we can now start charging to those, our whatever we're spending in staff time or consultants work that can be is eligible for reimbursement under the grant. And then secondly, that allows FRA to start working with us on the actual step one work, not just the scoping of the grant agreement. And so as you move forward here, and that grant is obligated, kind of first step is developing a project management plan, and that's something we're working on right now. And that's really going to be the project management plan for doing this step one. We're working on that now, expect to get that into FRA around the end of the month. And then the next step is to really start in the service development or scoping for the service development plan for this NLX corridor. A lot of that had already been done. It was wrapped up. All the work is wrapped up in between 2015 and 2017. And so we have an additional step in there, which is assessing that previous service development plan to determine what needs to be updated. So we're working on that as well, and we'll be working with FRA to define what the actual scope is for the updates to that previous SDP here over the next couple months. Another thing I wanted to mention about NLX is we have developed a FAQ, which we get a lot of questions about the project. Where is it going? And so we have developed a FAQ section and added that to our website. So if you do want to learn more about that project, we encourage you to hop on MnDOT's webpage. Just type in NLX or Northern Lights Express, and it will bring you to the page, and you'll see a frequently asked questions section, and we're going to be regularly updating that as new information becomes available. So that's a great place to direct people if they have questions or want to learn more about it. And then in terms of moving forward that corridor ID, once we get the scope worked out for the updates once we figure out what needs to be updated, we'll then work on developing that scope, schedule, budget. And then that's what will feed into step 2 of to develop that service development plan.
Yeah, I got a question. This is Jeremy Gregor from the city of Eau Claire. My understanding is that the Northern Lights Express will have a stop in Superior, Wisconsin, and how you are kind of incorporating that in your planning.
You are correct. We will have a station in Superior. As the line comes out of the Twin Cities, it heads north and extends over into Wisconsin, and that line comes up into Superior. It's where the big rail yard is, kind of on the west side of downtown. And then the line does a hard left and kind of heads west, goes across the Grassy Point Swing Bridge, which is the BNSF bridge, and then it swings to the right and then follows the lakeshore up to Duluth Union Depot. So what was identified in 2017 was the station site was just west on the west side of downtown Superior.
I think that's amazing that it can be so close to downtown. At least it appeared that way.
We can go ahead and roll into the Twin Cities Milwaukee Chicago project, which is adding a second daily train on the Twin Cities Milwaukee Chicago corridor to augment the N-Bar builder. A couple things are happening. Lots of things are happening concurrently. So first, I'll just touch on we're currently in final design for the project. The current focus is on wrapping up an update to environmental documentation to account for some additional work areas that we identified as we advanced design work. One example is we've identified that we need to extend out work areas along a lot of roadways where grade crossings are located, just to modify the approaches to address some hump crossings. We're looking at getting that submitted to FRA here in the next month or so and getting that wrapped up, and then we can proceed with on final design. And we are expecting some preliminary work may get started late this year, but likely most of it will probably be in 2026 will be probably the bulk of construction. And then I think what everybody's more excited about is probably the start of service. A lot's happening, and we're making a lot of headway on many different fronts. This includes everything from working on operational details to safety planning to determining ticket pricing and onboard amenities. So lots of things to figure out. We're making a lot of headway. And all these details do need to be reflected in our operating agreements, which are currently in negotiations. And since we are in active negotiations, to avoid complicating those, I'm somewhat limited in what we can say about some details, just don't want to impact those negotiations. But I do want to just reiterate, all 3 states and Amtrak are really working really hard together to get this thing started as soon as we can, and we are eagerly looking forward to announcing a start date and all of the details once all the agreements are in place. And so I think we're looking at probably about once all the agreements are signed, Amtrak does need some time to ramp up and prepare. And so I think we'll probably announce the start date about a month before the service will start. Other thing that's related to the start of service is WisDOT received a restoration enhancement grant from FRA to help support the first few years of operation while ridership grows. So that minimizes some of the costs to the state. Ridership doesn't hit the peak level right away. It takes a while to build up. And so that helps offset some of those operating costs while ridership grows, and we can grow our revenue to help control and stabilize those costs to the state. That grant is being transferred from WisDOT to Amtrak, and that's to help the states deal with some ways that they have to, 3 different states that we're dealing with, and how we all have to encumber funds, and so that's we're being shifted to address that. And I'll let Rich talk about that more in his update if he wants to. But that's another thing that we need to get that needs to be transferred, and that award needs to be either off the pre-award authority, either needs to be granted, or that grant needs to be fully obligated so that we can start the service. So that's another big piece to be aware of. And then I think Kevin did a great job of explaining what's happening at Union Depot and where the status of those agreements are. I'm sure Rich has a few other things to add about the start of service, so I'll defer to him on some other details. But I'll ask you if you have any questions. Otherwise, I have a couple other quick updates and a couple other things.
This kind of relates back to the NLX project. With WisDOT and the Superior Station, is there any funding from Minnesota or collaboration between WisDOT and MnDOT as to how the Superior Station will be funded? I wasn't real clear on that, I guess.
Sure, appreciate that. WisDOT and MnDOT work pretty closely together on all these different projects. My colleagues have probably talked to our partners, Rich and Lisa at WisDOT, more than I talk to most people in our office. But so we are going to be collaborating with WisDOT in terms of, I would defer in terms of what might be WisDOT might be doing, or state of Wisconsin legislature might be doing. I would defer that question over to Rich, and I would let him answer that as part of his presentation.
And now we'll move on to Rich, and we'll hear from the Wisconsin side of the track. So,
good morning, everyone. Greg really provided a lot of details on the TCMC start of service, so I really don't have much to say about that. Thanks, Greg, except to say that WisDOT is working very, very hard and is highly motivated to start the service as soon as possible. I will say that when you have 4 parties working on something, negotiation can be a little complex. WisDOT's approach is to keep things simple so we can start as soon as possible. As far as I did want to touch on our corridor ID grant agreements. So for those who don't know, WisDOT was selected for 4 corridor ID proposals, and so there are Chicago-Milwaukee, which we consider our trunk line, which enables expansion in other places of Wisconsin. Milwaukee, Madison, Eau Claire, Twin Cities, Hiawassee extension from Milwaukee to Green Bay, and then what we call TCMC2, which is Chicago, Milwaukee, La Crosse, Twin Cities. And we anticipate that, so we pretty much finished up our, what we call the attachment 2, which is the work scope for our grant funded studies. And we anticipate that all 4 grant agreements will be executed by the end of May, hopefully sooner, with work to begin this summer. We're also in the process of hiring consultants to assist us on those 4 step 1 studies. And we will be coordinating with the Eau Claire corridor folks on their efforts. Just keep aware of what each study is doing. We will have slightly different goals, and we anticipate the service development plans will be somewhat different for both studies, which also will probably mean that the investment strategies will be a bit different too. And that's really the end of my comments. I'll open it up for questions.
Rich, thanks for joining us today and with that update. Maybe following up on a couple of things regarding your seating on the the 4 grants. Can you confirm how soon you're going to be? I understand that initially you were going to stagger work on those, but is it, am I understanding correctly that, first of all, that you're going to be moving forward on all 4 of them simultaneously? And then I might ask you about your strategy for having consultants work on those grants, both in terms of will you have one consultant work on all 4 or multiple consultants? And then how much are you looking ahead to the next step, which would be the service development plan?
Well, your questions are very timely, Scott. And you know, we are keeping our consultant solicitation very open-ended. We anticipate hiring multiple consultants, and we're keeping our minds open about you know, whether or not that they would also be involved in step 2. We're staying flexible.
If I could ask one other question related to that, then, as far as how are you, and maybe I'm getting into the detail we could speak about offline, but since we're going through a similar process, how are you articulating the possibly moving on to step 2 when you go out and select a consultant?
I don't know if we've determined that yet. Lisa is on the call. Maybe I'll ask her to chime in.
Hi, good morning. Yeah, we're putting out solicitations for consultants this May through the May round, and it is for step 1. We're leaving it open for step 2. I think, you know, step 2, you know, we call it the service development plan, but it has a lot of parts to it. So I suspect the most likely outcome on step 2 is we'll probably have multiple contracts to complete all the different pieces. But we're leaving open the possibility that the consultant selected for step 1 could participate on some level, yet to be determined. I think it would really depend on the consultant that's selected. What are their strengths? What can they bring to the table for step 2? They may be able to do all of it. They may be able to do a portion of it, and we have to bring somebody else, and they can help manage the work. But that, it's pretty open. We're trying to keep that pretty open-ended. And then also for us, I would say it depends on the corridor you're talking about. The Milwaukee-Chicago corridor, it's probably going to be one consultant because so much of step 2 has already been done. So we've already got a consultant selected for that corridor, and we'll probably continue to work with them. Now, that doesn't mean we wouldn't bring on a consultant for some piece that needs to get done, that, you know, like the economic impact analysis or something like that. But we're trying to stay flexible, just like Rich said.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else have questions?
Okay, so next thing I wanted to touch on is, I believe I may have mentioned this before, but our municipal legislature did direct MnDOT to start studying the Twin Cities, St. Cloud, Fargo, Moorhead corridor. And so they asked us to do 2 studies. One was to look at extending the current Northstar commuter rail service, which operates from Minneapolis to Big Lake, extending that all the way to St. Cloud. We did deliver that report in mid-February, which was the deadline for that. And then due next year is a study to look at the full corridor all the way to Fargo Moorhead. And that's really to start looking at what are needs on that corridor for ridership. And that's supposed to look at both rail and bus. And it has a few things that we need to look at, potentially some costs in there. And then also they want to know what it might cost to close down Northstar as you think about you start adding a lot more inner city. Is there a need for some of the commuters? So that's in there as well. So we're currently scoping that and expect to get RFP on the street here very soon. And that report will be due in February next year. And then the last thing, so we have a lot on our plate. So I think I've mentioned this before, but we are growing our team, our passenger rail team, to deliver our passenger rail program. I think I mentioned that we did hire an engineer last fall. Since our last meeting, we have hired our leadership team. So we now have an assistant office director dedicated to passenger rail, and that's Matt Bailey, and he has a extensive Class 1 rail background, so that's great to have that experience. And then Peter Dahlberg, who's been with MnDOT for a number of years and was in passenger rail a number of years ago. More recently has been in a supervisor for the rail safety program and our rail grants program, has joined the team as our manager. And so great to have that experience as well. And then we're in the process of hiring a couple additional staff to augment so we can deliver all these projects. So that is my update. I'll open up to any questions. And thank you for your time.
This is Mark Quam. I had a question about MnDOT's funding through the Minnesota State Legislature. Long term, is there going to be guaranteed funding for hiring people and continuing the passenger rail program? Because I know with some states, it can be contingent on funding, and I'm just kind of concerned what the long range funding issue looks like for staffing MnDOT for passenger rail.
Sure, appreciate the question. So last year, our passenger rail budget had been for general operation of the passenger rail program had been set at like $500,000 for years and years and years. And so they did bump that up to, I believe it's $988,000, so almost doubled it for this current biennium. And then and that's a base kind of line item in our standard budget. So we have that in place. Knowing that we're going to be starting operating a new passenger rail service, they did authorize funding for that for the biennium, and then they pre-authorized funding for the next biennium. That still needs to be appropriated from the legislature during the next session, but they did at least pre-authorize that. And then once you get past the next biennium, we're currently in the first year of our biennium here in Minnesota, so the current biennium is fiscal year 24, fiscal year 25, and then so they did pre-authorize for 26 and 27, and then rolling into 2028, the other thing that they did do to give us some longer term stability and assurances to address your question is that they approved a new account that'll become effective at the start of fiscal year 2028, whereby a portion of the property taxes that freight railroads pay in Minnesota will be become eligible for and dedicated to passenger rail, which will allow us to have a dedicated funding source for operation and some of these planning and development activities. It's not going to be, it wouldn't be enough to pay for construction. So, we're still going to need, federal grants and other appropriations for that, but it does provide that continuity, dedicated funding source to provide that kind of